This time last year, Ferrari was proving to be a real challenger to the 2019 Mercedes. A year on, it's no match for the 2020 Mercedes, but it still found a way to do battle with the 2019 car in the form of its off-track battle with Racing Point. Racing Point's clone of last year's Mercedes W10 has bothered rival teams since it broke cover in testing. It resulted in Renault protesting the car's brake ducts in the first part of the season and winning that battle. But the saga didn't end there, with more sniping, threats of legal action and appeals. Other teams involved have backed away from that now, but not only is Ferrari still pursuing the action that others have dropped, it's now also going to challenge another part of Racing Point's punishment. Before we get into the latest escalation in this controversy that just won't end, remember to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already and want to show your support to the race, and hit the notifications bell so you'll never miss our videos in the future. Now let's get on with chapter 84 of the Pink Mercedes F1 Battleground.
Here we go again.
Now there's an open-ended question in 2020, but for this video we'll focus on Ferrari's role in the Racing Point row specifically. When Renault's protest of how Racing Point's rear brake ducts were designed was successful, the team was fined €400,000 and docked 15 points, but it was allowed to keep racing with the illegally designed parts. Renault, McLaren, Williams and Ferrari initially stated their intention of getting a more severe punishment handed out, but Ferrari now stands alone as the only team still pursuing that. Ferrari then upped the ante further after the Belgian Grand Prix when it emerged it also intends to appeal the reprimand Racing Point picks up at every race this year. Given repeated reprimands are pretty meaningless as they don't amount to anything more serious, Ferrari believes that element of the punishment is not severe enough. Ferrari is understood to be continuing with its original appeal in a bid to get clarity over a rule that could allow Racing Point to get a significant upgrade to its car for 2021 without having to use up the limited number of development tokens each team has for next year. As a customer team legally using several parts that form the basis of the 2019 Mercedes rear end, Racing Point will be allowed to upgrade to Mercedes 2020 parts in these areas next year without having to spend its development tokens. However, customer teams using current spec parts from a supplier like Haas does with Ferrari would have to spend tokens to upgrade to 2021 Ferrari bits next year. This has occasionally been referred to as a loophole in the F1 regulations, but it isn't. It's just a rule that has been there since the token rules were thrashed out in May, and it's quite clear, even if some teams are upset by it. The system has been implemented to save research and development costs. In this instance, Mercedes has already developed its rear-end architecture for 2020 and plan to no longer produce more versions of the outdated 2019 specification. The reason the Racing Point Mercedes link is causing so much concern among rival teams is that Mercedes developed what its technical director James Allison called an adventurous rear suspension design for this year, and the rules will allow Racing Point to inherit that radical design next season while also keeping its tokens free to spend on other parts of its car. Ahead of the Ferrari appeal reaching the FIA Courts, discussions are going on to reach an agreement before things get that far. While Ferrari is the only team still pursuing an appeal, it's believed to be one of 6 teams to have signed a letter sent to the FIA outlining their concerns about the rules around upgrading year-old components. The other teams to have signed that letter are understood to be McLaren, Renault, Williams, Haas and Alfa Romeo. Initially following the verdict and Racing Point's punishment over its brake ducts, Williams, McLaren and Renault all joined Ferrari in stating their intention to appeal. Mercedes customer Williams and 2021 Mercedes customer McLaren were the first to drop out, claiming they were satisfied by the FIA's efforts to rule out cars being copied in future using the same methods Racing Point deployed last winter. Williams and McLaren insist their decisions have nothing to do with current or future Mercedes tyres, so it must just be coincidence that they are dropping a case that Mercedes really doesn't want to go to the Court of Appeal and has been implicated in by virtue of its supply of the brake ducts. In the wake of the new F1 Concord agreement being signed before the Belgian Grand Prix, Renault withdrew its appeal as well, saying that intensive and constructive work behind the scenes had led to concrete progress in preventing copycat cars. But as with the teams that have a Mercedes link, this is unlikely to be the full story. New Renault chief Luca De Meo, for example, was known to have discussions with Mercedes F1 boss Toto Wolff at the Spanish Grand Prix, so the usual back and forth of F1 politics is at play in the background. Speaking of politics, the new Concord Agreement is believed to be behind Ferrari's decision not to back down. While the FIA has been clear that it will not change the rules governing year-old customer parts, there is a hope among those who oppose the rule that the terms of the new Concord Agreement could have an impact. The new Concord Agreement takes immediate effect, and rule changes no longer require unanimous agreement, in this case just a supermajority of 28 out of the 30 votes split between the teams, the FIA and F1 itself. Fortunately, we have a handy graphic to help explain how that works. It's possible that a deal could be struck where the rules around token usage for 2021 are altered, and Ferrari ends up being sufficiently satisfied to drop its appeals relating to Racing Point. The other complication here, though, is that Racing Point is also appealing its punishment in an attempt to clear its name and get the fine and points penalty wiped away. Quite how F1 could go about a solution that would appease all sides still involved in this saga and avoid a date in the FIA Court of Appeal feels like a mystery at this point. It may need further so-called mediation from Wolff to convince Racing Point that taking the guilty verdict is better than dragging the matter out further. So that's where we stand on F1's long-running argument of 2020. Give this video a thumbs up if you think it made sense of the latest off-track battles, and remember to hit that subscribe button if you'd like to keep up with everything else we're doing here at the race. And tell us what you think of this battleground in the comments. Should Ferrari focus on its own problems and drop the action given Racing Point has already been punished, or is it right that the small fine, points penalty and meaningless reprimands weren't enough? And do the rules that everyone is arguing over for next year need changing, or is it fair enough that Racing Point can get its hands on a major Mercedes development for next year without using its development tokens?